It's Thursday. It's 8:30 p.m. and 12 seconds. Good evening, everybody. It's late night soaring with the flight of the month August. Yeah, and I'm talking English, so you might think about the pilot. It might not a German one, so you might be right. Just we start with hello, Miguel.
Hi, everybody.
Today with me here. What do we have for flights in the month of August?
Okay, I'll share my screen real quick. So usually we would look for flight of the month somewhere in that area with a lot of kilometers, faster flights. But this month we'll have something special. And this is
It's a real special flight. We never had a flight like this before.
quite far down the table, but not because it's not an interesting flight, because there are not that many kilometers. But if we open the flight, we can see what's so special about it. The final altitude, or the highest altitude of the flight, was more than 18,000 meters. So that's quite impressive. And that's the reason why we invited Jim Payne for this episode of Late Night Soaring.
Good evening, Jim.
Good evening. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so you can start your video, please. Yeah, so welcome back. We already know you in Late Night Soaring. We made a session, I think it was in January this year, about the flying area of Minden. But at this time, you didn't flew in Minden. It was in Argentina. And actually, it wasn't a long distance flight. It was, I think it was the sixth highest altitude ever in history with a glider, wasn't it?
That is correct, yes.
And it was flight level 600, which is quite impressive. And I think most of the gliding pilots know about the Berlin project, that it exists, but actually just a few pilots know more than it exists, and that the goal is to go as high as possible. So first of all, congratulations for this flight. Even it wasn't the highest one, but it was a real impressive one. And I think you can tell us and our spectators a little bit about the Berlin project from the beginning, because this is not the first aircraft which were designed for this kind of flights.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here. And as Matthias has said, we're going to talk about the Berlin project today. The real key to the Berlin project is the polar vortex. Einer Volzen and a bunch of us that used to fly in the Southern Sierra normally we're only able to get to the tropopause. And typically at the latitudes that we fly here in Nevada or California, tropopause is somewhere between 35 and 45,000 feet. And above that level, the winds die off. And when the winds die off, you don't have enough energy to propagate the wave to high altitude. On days that people have gotten higher than 45,000 feet in the Sierra, they've been unusual days when the tropopause has been at 50 or 55,000 feet, but those days are really rare. So we kind of assumed that you couldn't get high, but Einer discovered that in the wintertime, near the poles, there's something called the polar night jet or the polar vortex that circulates at very high altitude. And this causes high altitude winds that allow the wave to propagate very high. In the graphic right here, this spot here is El Calafate, Argentina, towards the tip, the landmass being here. Australia is over here, and Antarctica is in the middle. One thing to note is the winds are circulating over ocean. And that is nice in the sense that it keeps the low-level temperatures a little bit more moderate, so that El Calafate, when we were there typically the average temperature is around 0 centigrade, which is, not too difficult to do ground operations with, as opposed to, say, northern Sweden, where it might be minus 40 in the ground. The downside, of course, is when we do all our forecasting, it's based on models. And when you have no surface observations, it's difficult to have good initialization in the models. Dan Gudgel, who did our weather, would pull his hair out because he would look at the model and then he'd look at the satellite picture, and very often the shape and location of the clouds would indicate that the fronts were not exactly where the model said they were. And on those days, he was a little skeptical about the quality of his forecast. And on the right, this is an exploded graphic of this image. If we look at the circulation, this being the South Pole, 90 south, and this being the equator, in the wintertime, we have a tropical jet in the troposphere. And then there is another jet, which is further south, which is kind of a polar jet. And then you have the polar night jet up high. And to really make these high altitude flights, you want the lower jet stream to be underneath the polar night jet. So you have strong winds that propagate up into the upper atmosphere. In 2006, Einar Voltson and Steve Fawcett flew a modified 505 to over 50,000 feet to claim the world altitude record. They were using pressure suits that they'd borrowed from NASA. And on the way down, they decided they were going to build a pressurized sailplane. The pressure suits get very stiff with altitude because they pressurize, and it becomes difficult to move in the cabin. And no matter how well you seal your canopy, it's going to shrink. And they had big canopy leakages that caused the temperature inside the cabin to be extremely cold. Whereas in the Perlin, because it's pressurized, we have no cold air leaking in. So even though it gets cold in the cabin, it's reasonable. On the sunny side, it might be somewhere around 0. On the far shady side, it might be minus 15 or so. But the way we dress, it's actually relatively comfortable in the cabin. So this is a diagram of the Perlin. It's basically a space capsule with wings. It's got 2 seats because Steve Fawcett wanted to fly along with Einar. And, this front part, which is the space capsule portion, is built to spacecraft standards. So it has a safety factor of 3, whereas, for instance, the wing spar has a safety factor of 1.5, which is normal for aircraft construction. Things we've learned over the years, anything that's electronic really needs to be warmed. And of course, the air bottle regulator and the oxygen bottle regulator, we also have heaters on those to keep those from freezing up because, especially the air bottle, if it froze up, we would lose the pressurization. The way the pressurization works is the cabin is sealed and we just take air from the air bottle. We pump the air bottle up with a scuba pump. And so in the cabin, we have 21% oxygen. And then we're also using a rebreather so that we're rebreathing 100% oxygen. And what that does is it keeps oxygen concentration in the cabin from going too high. If you have a normal oxygen system, much of the air that you breathe in is oxygen when you breathe out. So if you had a normal system, you would gradually have a rapid increase in the oxygen content. Yeah. The one upgrade we had for 2023 is a Thales link. And basically it is a iridium linked communication system, satellite communication system that uses some software from VideoSoft that takes the tail camera image and transmits it real time. So this is a screen grab from our virtual cockpit which we operate when we fly. You can see that it shows various parameters of interest. And this image here is a real-time image taken from the tail camera. That was a big hit. People that were watching a virtual cockpit really enjoyed seeing things real time. This image here, I'm still on tow. You can see the tow plane right there. And this protuberance at the top here is our 5-hole probe. It's at the top of the tail. So
and
now
it like it's dark. The sky is really dark, like on the picture. It's
just like the picture, yes. And it just because the air gets thin, there's not as much
space. Huh?
Yes. Yeah, the camera is a pretty true image of what you see. Okay. So we've now had 5 campaigns, 20 through 22. We did not go to Argentina because of COVID, and in 22, the commercial shipping system for containers was so discombobulated they would not guarantee they could get our container there in time. And it's kind of critical that we be there during the window when the high waves might occur. So this year we were there from July 22nd to September 12th.
Okay, my question is concerning the time of the year. You're going between August, September, but the long distance flights in the wave in Argentina, we know from Klaus Ullmann and all the other guys, which is in November or December. What's the reason you're going in the winter on the southern hemisphere and the long distance flights are in the summer?
Yes, well, the polar vortex occurs in the wintertime when the pole gets extremely cold. By this time of year, the winds at high altitude in the polar vortex have died off because it's driven by the energy change. If you think about the total pressure that's at the very high altitudes, it takes a while for the air to accelerate and decelerate because, the pressures are really small. You might see a gust that has a greater pressure change at sea level than the total pressure at, say, 80,000 feet. So as such, that energy that is required to cause the polar vortex only occurs in the wintertime. It also occurs in the northern hemisphere, but it's probably about 40% stronger in the southern hemisphere, probably because the Antarctic continent is much colder than the Arctic, because the Antarctic, of course, is a landmass as opposed to ocean.
Okay, so it means
so anyway, the high altitude waves
will be there the whole year round. But in the wintertime, you have higher waves to higher altitudes. But in the summertime, and those long distance flights because you have the day length is longer. Yeah.
But if Gordo went down with his night vision goggles, he could do long flights in the winter. It's just a matter of tolerating the cold and the darkness.
That's the next step, I guess.
Yes. So anyway, we own a container, and we modified the interior with shelves so that we can take all of the spare parts and ground support equipment. And the sailplane and trailer were designed so they would fit inside a 40-foot container. So the folks at Cobra built us a special trailer. It's like a meter longer than any trailer that they've ever built before, and it just barely fits inside the container. Once you load the container goes on a truck, and it goes to either Oakland or Los Angeles, and then it goes by boat to Chile. And then from Chile, it goes by truck through the Andes to Mendoza. And then from Mendoza, it goes south to El Calafate. This is El Calafate Airport. It's next to...
Just a question to the aircraft. Who built the aircraft and who designed it? The Perlan?
Well, Einar Volson was really responsible for the specifications and the layout of the airplane. And then Greg Cole was the lead designer. Picked the airfoils and basic structure of the airplane. And then it was built by Greg Cole's company, and then it was assembled by a company called RDD. And then, pardon me?
In
it was
which
assembled
city is
in
it
Oregon.
In Oregon, okay.
Yes. Yeah, it's a one-off. It's a pre-preg carbon. And Morgan Sandercock, who's our chief engineer, is responsible for the instrumentation system and most of the avionics that are inside the Perlin. So anyway, there's a nice hangar that belongs to the Aero Club that we've been able to use. One challenge, of course, is they don't have a taxiway that goes to the approach end. Notice all the rubbers on this end because the winds are normally out of the west. Lago Argentino, and then here are the Andes. At this latitude, the elevations out here are 10 to 12,000 feet, as opposed to up in the 20s when you get to the northern Andes. The airport, when we get there in late July, normally they have about 3 flights. They fly a lot of 737, 800s in and out, for tourists. And by the time you leave in September, they're up to maybe a dozen flights. In the summertime, it's a pretty busy place because of the glaciers and the tourism. This is a graphic. This is the Southern Patagonia ice fields. This is all in national park. It's about 50 kilometers from the airport to the ridge. And typically we're towing to the ridge. The border is at the spine of the Andes. And the glaciers here are absolutely fantastic. It's worth putting them on your bucket list as one of the places to visit. Okay, right here, I've got a short video that was taken by Insta360 camera that we put in the airplane. And this is kind of what see on takeoff. Going behind the egret is very interesting. It's 750 horsepower turboprop. We're normally towing it at 80 knots indicated airspeed. It's flat rated to 28,000 feet. So we typically climb 1,000 to 1,200 feet a minute to 28,000. And then above 28,000, the climb rate starts slowing down a little bit. The tow line tension is pretty high, so the Perlin really wants to follow the egret. This antenna here is from
coming to Cafate. It's a tow plane. Is it flying down there, or where is it?
Yes,
based?
Yeah, it just got a 108-foot wingspan, and it's got a max gross weight of almost 10,000 pounds. So it's a relatively big airplane. It would be a difficult thing to put in a container. So
yeah, okay. Where's
so
it
Arnie
based? The egret, where is it based?
North Texas Regional Airport, north of Dallas, Texas. So it's a pretty long ferry for him.
Yeah, that's a long flight, I guess.
Right. So anyway, when we're flying, we got the eye windows, kind of like looking out a couple of straws. In recent years, Morgan has built a little heater that goes inside these plenums. You can kind of see an edge here. There's a plexiglass plane here, which causes a plenum. And as such, with the heaters, we're able to keep those pretty open. We tend to get frost on the down sun side, remembering that the sun is on the north in Argentina when the winds are out of the west. And then, so this window on the right, normally you can see out of, but the one on the left is frosted over, and then the hatch will frost over a little bit at high altitude. And this is an antenna for our vector nav inertial system. Okay, this particular day, Jamie Darcy was there. He rented a helicopter, so he's actually taking photographs as we launch. Pretty good acceleration. One day we had almost 30 knots wind. Takeoff roll was probably about 50 meters.
Is it difficult to fly?
The stick forces on tow are very high, especially in roll, because we're flying at 80 knots. The other challenge, of course, is you have limited visibility, so you don't dare get very far out of position because you're going to lose sight of the tow plane. So you have to be pretty aggressive about staying in position. And, the flickering here is artifact of the camera, little display. This is our life support systems display, which shows, say, oxygen levels and pressurizations and so on. It basically has many pages, and you can see much of the data that are recorded and collected by the systems that Morgan has put into the Merlin. This is taken from a tail camera on egret. Typically, the egret starts making a contrail about 25,000 feet, maybe up to 40,000 feet. And we get a little ice on the rope sometimes. Another nice image. One of the few days we had particular clouds this year. This is another graphic of what it's like on tow. If you look real close in this little window here, you can see the egret as we are climbing here. You see the egret right there, watching it through a straw. And right there, you can only see the wing. And again, spectacular vistas outside. This is the northern arm of Lago Argentino. And then, on some of these valleys here, you see glaciers. And this is just a frame capture. So this was taken at 54,000 feet on the flight that we're talking about. You can see already that the inside of the cabin is pretty much frosted up. And it's not uncommon on the way down when these things start melting. It kind of rains in the cabin. The rebreather system, got an inlet hose and exhaust hose on the oxygen system. Got emergency oxygen bottles. There's actually two of them there. One's hidden behind my arm, one for the front and one for the back. We're using LX 9000s. These have been modified to be high altitude flight recorders. And so we had redundancy. We actually have independent LX 9000s as opposed to having a repeater in the back. This is the life support systems display. You can see here the oxygen levels. And in this case, the cabin O2 is up to 26%. The fire risk is a, function of the concentration. And we try to keep it below 28% just so that we keep the fire risk low.
So I do have a question. You said it is a pressurized cabin, but you're under the oxygen mask. Why that?
Well, whenever you breathe, you're exhausting carbon dioxide. So if you were in a shirt sleeve cabin not using the oxygen system, then you'd have to have some system inside the cabin that circulated the air, some sort of scrubber that takes the carbon dioxide out. But the rebreather, the scrubber is in the rebreather system. So you have just one small scrubber and you don't need the electrical power or the fans or whatever it would be required to circulate the air. The other thing is we're breathing 100% oxygen. That gives us a little bit of resistance to decompression sickness if we have a depressurization. So say we had a rapid depressurization, if you're above the Armstrong line, of course, it's probably going to be extremely serious. Actually up above about 42,000 feet, even breathing 100% oxygen. If you have, a total decompression, that's going to be extremely dangerous and potentially life-threatening.
Yeah.
But this gives us a good trade-off. Another view outside the side window. This is the northern branch, and it's Benghazi. There's a big glacier here, another glacier here, but spectacular views. And then this is a video of our release from the camera that's in the wheel well. There goes the rope. And you can see the cut lines on here. Those are on there in case we had some ground emergency and they have to try to cut us out of the cabin. And here's the view from the high point of the flight on August 23rd. As you noted, the sky is pretty spectacular. So, you know, some things that drove the weather this year. Each time we go, it seems, you know, there's a different pattern. This year, they've had record snow in central parts of Argentina and Chile, you know, around Bariloche where the ski areas are. You know, they've had a lot of snow. And basically that was because the jet stream split. It kind of went over Bariloche most of the winter. This is Tago afterwards. He was driving with Ed and Linda back to Mendoza. And this was somebody they found along the road that had run off the road that they helped. But a consequence of having the split jet stream is the low-level winds over El Calafate were very light for most of the time we were there. And because they were light, they're not triggering the stratospheric wave. Here's the forecast that we had before takeoff on August 23rd. And I grabbed this slide from my briefing that I gave the team. And basically we briefed that we're going to tow straight out, make a right-hand turn, and then hopefully, you know, we typically, the ground speed is relatively slow because the wind speeds are pretty strong. And we're 40,000 feet or so by the time we get to here. So you make this turn, we're up in the low 40s. And hopefully we'd be connected and off to the races. And we actually towed as we briefed, but we didn't find any lift anywhere. So you can see what pattern Arnie flew, and basically we kind of flew every place we might find some lift. And eventually, I think it was like an hour and 48 minutes or so on tow, I decided to get off. I found something that's kind of weak right here. Just some other exploring, and eventually we found some lift here, and then we got up to 60,000 feet, this area right here.
And what was the climb rate, average climb rate?
Oh, and this right here, probably 1 to 1.5 meters a second is all. It's extremely slow.
Quite a while.
Not very much, but you know, on a good day, you spend about an hour on tow. That'll get you to the low 40s. And then if you're going to 90 from, say, 45, excuse me, you only need to average about 1.5 meters per second to get there in the time that we have available due to the amount of air and oxygen that's on the airplane. So you don't need a high climb rate, but it'd be nice to have, you know, say 3 or 4 meters so you can get there pretty rapidly. But anyway, this is kind of our plot here. And then we came on down. This is kind of the big cross section. You know, earlier I showed you what we'd like to see. You know, in this case, the tropical jet stream in the troposphere is kind of light. And then down here, the polar tropospheric jet stream is extremely light. There's 50,000 feet, and we got up to 60. But the winds were never as strong as the winds we saw, for instance, in 2018 when we got to 76,000 feet. And then here is a short video of landing. It's kind of a challenge because the way the windows are arranged, you can't see the runway for the whole pattern. So part of the pattern, you're kind of using other references. And typically I try to offset just slightly from the center line so I can see it. If you land exactly on center line, you can't see the center line because of the arrangement of the windows. Okay, this is the team.
What was the wind speed at the ground?
On that particular day, it was pretty light, 10 knots.
Okay, that's no problem.
The first flight we made was kind of really spectacular. On downwind, I was showing, I don't know, 55 knots of tailwind. And when we turned final, it was, I forget, 30 or 35 knots headwind on final. At touchdown, the winds on the surface were probably 25 to 30. And fortunately, they're pretty much down the runway. But, you know, the big changes in ground speed make it interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, our team. You know, we're trying to do science here. I think the biggest thing that we've proved is the stratospheric waves exist. You know, there's evidence from balloons and stuff, but you know, we've proven that you can soar them. We've done a lot with forecasting. You know, Matthew from SkySight has been extremely helpful.
Jim, just another question to the team. There was around 20 people standing around.
Yes.
How many of them are flying in the Pearl line? Is this just you? Or
we have 4 pilots that fly in the Pearl line. Yes. So anyway, what Matthew did for us towards the end was he created what he called sync rate compensated wave forecasts. You know, the sync rate goes up like the true airspeed goes up. At 90,000 feet, your true airspeed is 6.7 times your indicated airspeed, which causes for some interesting piloting challenges. However, you know, the wind speeds on a good day may be, you know, 160, 180 knots at 90,000 feet. So the two kind of offset each other. But you need really strong lift because, you know, if your sync rate's 100 feet per minute or, you know, half a meter at sea level, it's going to be 6.7 times that when you get to altitude. And so anyway, Matthew did that for us, which made it a little bit easier. He also created probabilities for us. The flight probability is the probability of the weather being okay, i.e. no clouds and the surface winds not being a really strong crosswind. And then the record probability is a probability that you might get high enough for a record. Thales, in addition to supporting the link, they also had a team that is doing artificial intelligence work. And they created a model of the wave system using the weather extreme WRF model, using X-plane to simulate the Perlin. They would run many cases. They developed some algorithms to optimize our routes. And we actually were using Dropbox to send some of their routes to the LX9000 via Wi-Fi. Another thing we did was we had a radio occultation sensor. Now on this graphic here, they're using a satellite, but you know, the Perlin would be maybe right here. And what happens is as the GPS satellites set and rise over the horizon, the signals that they're sending are bent by the atmosphere. And this bending is a function, one of the items that affects the bending is the humidity. And knowing the time, knowing where the satellite is supposed to be, and knowing what the recorded value is, they can post-flight process the data and calculate the humidity say 100 kilometers away towards the horizon. And what their eventual scheme is, once they perfected the technology, is to potentially put these on airliners. So as they fly around the world, especially over the ocean, they can do remote sensing of humidity and potentially have much better inputs to their models so that they get better weather forecasts. Ozone, you have ozone sensor, and that is pretty typical for Argentina. Up to the tropopause, there's essentially no ozone. And then as you get up into the stratosphere, the ozone starts increasing. And by 60,000 feet, the ozone is relatively abundant. So while we were there was no ozone hole over El Calafate. There may have been a hole to the south, but not near El Calafate. And then temperature. All of our flights, we see an interesting phenomenon. In fact, Morgan is working on a little algorithm to give us a display in the cockpit that show what the temperature change has been over the last few minutes. But basically, in the climbing air, the air is tending to rise, so it's going to be colder. We're measuring significantly colder air. And then when we're in sinking air, which is the orange, the air is warmer. And there's actually the possibility, knowing basically what the temperature is outside of the sinking and rising air, to use that as a second order variometer. We also carry in CubeSats in both the egret and in the Perlin 2. And I think we had about 9 up this year that we carried at various stages. And then other science, I'm dearly interested in condors. You see them all the time. There's abundance of them in southern Argentina. And one place that's especially good for viewing condors is up towards the north and towards Mount Fitzroy, which is kind of the symbol of Patagonia. So this is right along the highway going into the Fitzroy area. And you can't really tell it here, but this is the top of a cliff. There's a drop off here to a river, and it might be, 40 meters or so down. So the first time we came along this road, it was about 300 or 400 feet overcast. And this is like 2016, and there were a couple condors that were ridge soaring along there. And they stopped ridge soaring, started circling. They went right up to the clouds and disappeared. So this year, as we're coming down this same road on a condor viewing trip, came across these 2 condors that were sitting alongside the highway. Whoops. See if I can get the video to play properly here. So anyway, this is their mating ritual here. We have a good friend who has a webcam at a condor roost up near Bariloche. And he's seen this on his webcam, but he said we're extremely fortunate to see this in nature. But totally majestic birds. They're so big and they're so good at soaring. After we viewed this, we went up to the Mirador Overlook, and there was a juvenile up there that kept buzzing us, and he eventually landed about 5 meters away and just sat there for about 3 or 4 minutes and watched us, and then he soared off again. Pretty spectacular. And afterwards, this pair took off and they did a little ridge soaring demonstration.
What's the wingspan?
Another condor in the background at maybe, 150 meters above the ground.
Well, what is the wingspan of the condor?
I think they're over 2 meters or around 2 meters. But amazing birds, they kind of live in the mountains. You know, they roost in little nooks and crannies. In the morning, they go soar out in the pampa. So they go downwind, maybe 50 kilometers or so. Then they eat, and then they manage to get airborne again. Then they soar back to their roost. And I threw this one in because it's kind of interesting. You know, in the gliding world, the first guy in a thermal sets the turn direction. Whoops. Not so in the condor world. You got the guy on the right, he's turning right. The one on the left is turning left. And they need their powerful arms there. And then the second one comes in and he has another head-on pass. And we saw this several times. There was one gaggle we saw that must have had 7 or 8 of them in it. And there was a couple turning the wrong way. And every once in a while, you'd see a fluff of feathers as they avoided each other. So in summary, this graphic here kind of shows our high flights from the various years that we've been there. And then while we're there, of course, we've given lots of talks to the schools. This was one of the technical schools that they have in El Calafate. As I mentioned earlier, our high flight this year was our 6th highest flight, the 6th highest glider flight ever. And looking towards the future, you know, because we've been involved, we've gotten so that we kind of expect more than we might or maybe should expect. It's actually a big challenge flying to these high altitudes, you know, because we basically have this spacecraft with wings. Just the logistics of operating it is not near as easy as taking your, you know, Arcus M to a Bariloche and flying long flights. And, you know, as with all soaring, we're kind of at the mercy of the weather. So when we go to Argentina, you know, we're counting on the polar vortex working, counting on the lower level winds to be strong enough to cause tropospheric wave. And we're counting on there being days when the wave is working and it's not too cloudy to fly. You know, if you go much before the 1st of August, you have challenges with the clouds. This year, we actually had challenges with too much cloud cover in August into early September. So anyway, you know, we have a fantastic team, great group of people, and it's been great going soaring with them. With that, I entertain any questions you might have.
I do have a question to the wave. Is this absolutely quiet wave, or is it a little bit bumpy if you're at flight level 600? What is the feeling?
It's the smoothest wave flights I've ever done. With the egret, we climb so fast, we are way above the rotor zones by the time we get there. So, you know, whereas the first couple of years there when we're towing with other airplanes, we did encounter some pretty good rotor. But for instance, the 76,000 foot flight, that was totally smooth the entire flight. Our flight to 60,000 this time was entirely smooth the whole flight. So there is the possibility at very high altitude maybe of a breaking wave, but we have never encountered one. You know, there's speculation that the turbulence, if the wave breaks, would be strong. Although, you know, I'm not 100% certain because the total pressure up there is so low, you can't have a super high pressure differential. So it might be kind of a slow motion event. So you're not going to see high G's. It's just going to be a wild ride.
If you could redesign the aircraft now or rebuild a new or build a new aircraft now, would it look the same or would it be differently?
It would look pretty much the same. The absolute number one thing I would do is I would make the two eye windows into a single window. They're done the way they are to try to minimize weight, but I'd be willing to accept, 5 or 6 extra kilograms to have a larger front window, and I would have it incorporate electronic heating in a grid so that you could be absolutely certain that it's not going to frost over.
What is the weight?
The empty weight of the purlin is, I don't know in kilos, it's about 1,450 pounds. And we're using a max gross weight of 2,000 pounds. We're normally flying with all of our science equipment and clothing and so on at about 1,960 pounds.
Okay. And the other question is, you have the problem with the lowest speed and the high speed, and then you're coming in the buffet corner. So what's the limit, the absolute maximum you can go, where the maximum speed is the same as the minimum speed?
Okay, the so-called coffin corner.
Buffet corner,
yeah.
The other
our
corner.
Our stall speed is 40 knots indicated. And at 90,000 feet, our indicated airspeed maximum is 54 knots. And we've done that because we'd like to be able to turn. If you extrapolate the Mach limit until we get to the stall speed, those two lines cross at about 96,000 feet. So in theory, if you had a straight long wave that you could fly straight ahead in, you could fly to 96,000 feet at 40 knots indicated airspeed. And when you got there, you'd have absolutely no maneuvering room. Now, what would happen is if you exceed the Mach limit, you start getting shock waves on top of the wing, which would cause the drag to go up, which would cause the airplane to stop climbing. Now, you'd also get shock waves on the tail, so there's a possibility that the airplane would want to pitch down on you. The kind of the Mach tuck, the P-38, for instance, had Mach tuck. And by the P-38L, they put the dive brakes on it. So if it got in Mach tuck, you just put the dive brakes out. So in our case, if it pitched down because of shock waves, step one is to deploy the air brakes. And if that doesn't control the airspeed, then we've got the drogue chute in the tail, that's a 5-meter diameter that allows us to come straight down at 80 knots or so indicated. We would deploy that until we had, regained control. But at 90,000 feet, typically I'm trying to fly about 45 to 47 indicated. So that gives us a margin on each side. And we would, stop at 90,000 feet. So we have the ability to turn.
So that's a goal. 90,000 feet is the goal. And even if the wave would be better, you would stop at 90,000.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which is quite high, actually.
Yes.
Okay. And I have another question about ATC. Is it difficult, the coordination with ATC? Or they're wondering what in the hell the guys are doing there?
The Argentines have been fantastic. We've gone out of our way to establish a great relationship with them. And basically, because the air traffic is so low, they have given us a NOTAM. And basically, the NOTAM allows us to go to flight level 910 inside a established area that is over the El Calafate area. So before takeoff, they give us a clearance, and basically we're allowed to climb the 910 inside the allowed airspace. They do not have air traffic control radar that far south, so they request that we give them position reports every half hour. That's kind of fun giving position reports above 50,000 feet because the few airliners are out there listening. So they're hearing this plenty of door reporting that, in the case of our 76,000 foot flight, that was especially fun reporting our flight level.
I can imagine there would be some strange reaction of the airliners if you heard, okay, yes, we are flying for level 600. Oh, what kind of aircraft is that?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, great. And the next project will be next summer, I guess, or the next winter on the Southern Hemisphere? What's the plans?
Well, the plan will depend on funding. At end of this year, we'll audit our finances and make a decision based on our finances what the next step's going to be.
Yeah, I can imagine it's not a cheap project. And I see there's Airbus is involved in this project.
Yeah, Airbus has been fantastic. At this point, we have a fixed amount of money that Airbus gave us for sponsorship, and that's about run out. So
the sponsoring is running out, or what was it?
Well, they originally gave us money for like 3 years of flights, and because we've been extremely frugal, we've been able to go 5 times. So, but we're at the end of our funding right now.
Okay.
So we hope that this continues. So it's if you see these videos and these pictures,
it would be nice to make another stab at 90,000 feet. Hopefully we would have better weather.
So maybe we found some guys will spend some money via late night soaring for this project.
Exactly. Yes.
That would be amazing.
They can contact us, of course, if they want to like to spend a little bit. And for the others who have so much money to spend for this project, they can pay a little bit for our Yaos people in Königsdorf if you like the show. You can send or PayPal. If you have not as much as money to finance the whole Berlin project, you're very welcome to send some money for young glider people in Königsdorf. PayPal. And for the bigger ones, you don't use PayPal, then we got a negotiation how we're going to do it. Yeah, Jim, thank you very much for your time. It was really interesting. It was definitely the highest flight in August. So it was the flight of the month. It was definitely the interesting gliding flight in the month in August. Thanks to be here, and I hope to see you soon again or next year when you're gonna tell us you have to stop in climbing in flight level 900 because the wave would be go on, but you have to stop because of the maximum speed and the minimum speed.
Well, danke sehr.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the flight of the month. Jim, please stay after stop of the recording a little bit in the meeting. We say thank you for listening and see you next time at Late Night Soaring. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.